Greetings and welcome to Writers on Writing. I am Dr. Brenda Greene, and this radio show is paid for by Medgar Evers College. Writers on Writing comes to you each week and gives you, our listening audience, an opportunity to hear writers from the African diaspora talk about their work, their lives, and their craft. And I'm very, very pleased to have with me, not for the first time again, Dr. Farah Jasmine Griffin. Welcome, Dr. Griffin.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to have the chance to talk with you.
You stay busy. I just want to share with our listening audience, Farah Jasmine Griffin is Chair of African Diaspora Studies, Director of the Institute for Research in African American Studies, and the William B. Ransford Professor of English and Comparative Literature and African American Studies, all at Columbia University. She's also an affiliate faculty of the Center for Jazz Studies, and her research interests are in African American and American literature, music, and history. She has published widely on issues of race and gender, feminism, jazz, and cultural politics. Her most recent book that we will be discussing today is Read Until You Understand: The Profound Wisdom of Black Life and Black Literature. And that is just the most recent, but her other books include Harlem Nocturne, a woman artist and progressive politics during World War II, which is also a fascinating book. The Jazz Collect, the John Coltrane and the Greatest Jazz Collection Ever, one of my favorite artists. If You Can't Be Free, A Mystery in Search of Billie Holiday, another one. And Beloved Sisters and Letters from Rebecca Primus of Royal Oak, Maryland. That's just some of the work. And she has published dozens of essays. She's a frequent commentator. She's presented at numerous conferences. She is truly living the life of the mind, as witnessed by this book. So one of the things you explore in this book, you explore so many topics around love and justice, rage, resistance, death, cultural beauty. And it really, for me, it gave me not only a deeper understanding of you, but it forced me to look at literature in a different way. And I sense you must have been doing this for a long time, because you talked about how it impacted you personally. So tell us about the process, your motivation and process for writing the book and for structuring it this way.
Sure. The book allowed a lot of different strands to come together. One of the reasons why I wanted to write it was so often, and you know this, as literary critics, we are trained to think about literature in a particular way and to teach it and to write about it in a particular way, which is very important. And we all do it and devote our professional lives to doing it. But I realized that there are some people who would never end up in my classroom. And I wanted them to also know why this body of literature was important. And that it wasn't important because I say so as a professor or because the academy recognizes it. And I thought I'd share with them that my introduction to many of these writers came long before I knew I would be a professor. And they were important to me. They were important to my life. And I think they're important to all of us. And so I wanted to kind of shift gears from I'm always a professor, I'm always a teacher, but shift gears in terms of the audience that I spoke to. So that was one strand. The other reason, the other thread that came is I just felt like our country was yet again, in a crisis around race, around the ways it treats Black people, and even beyond us, a crisis of democracy. And I thought, wow, couldn't this place learn a lot from reading what Black people have had to say about it? And so that was another motivation. And those two motivations kind of came together. And the book gave me a chance to address both of those.
And centered in your work is Toni Morrison. She continues to come back to us. I think Toni Morrison and your dad, your father, which brought back so many memories. But Toni Morrison continues to come to us. And I just want to give a quote and ask you to reflect on why she was so important and why you dedicated this book to her. She records their speech, talking about what she does in her text. She records their speech, their poetry, and their minds, and then minds, both diction and syntax, for larger philosophical and ethical implications. In all of her works, there is a sense of loss, not nostalgia, but loss of this peoplehood, this village, and the values it takes to survive.
Yeah, I think that just reading her, she became a great teacher to me, and a teacher that helped me value my own community and my own people even more. And partly that's because of the ways that she will take, um, things in the vernacular, things that Black people might say or that were said by a certain generation of Black people, that these aren't just throwaway phases, that these phrases contain entire worldviews. They contain the things that a community values. They contain the ethics and the aspirations of the community. So she gives us an appreciation for the depth and the complexity of phrases and people that we might just take for granted or even buy into kind of the larger stereotypes that they don't have any deeper meaning or that language is just poor English. And she'll say, no, there's a reason why people say those things in the way that they say them. And
that speaks to your desire to make sure that you're reaching a broad range of people, the general public. So you're giving them a way in, and you're saying, look at what she is doing. Look at her language, and look at what else they're saying. So as I said, I think what happens, even me, someone who teaches literature, I even looked at literature a little bit more deeply. And as someone who teaches, it also helped to give me a way in for my students, some of who are not English majors,
right.
But you have to introduce them to literature.
Absolutely. And they say, well, why is this important? Why is this it's not dealing with the real life problems? And I'm like, oh, yes, it is. It's dealing with them, and it's giving us the time to think deeply about them. And I think that Morrison is an invitation, always an invitation to think more deeply.
Which one of Morrison's works, I know you love all of them, really speak to you?
That's so interesting, Dr. Greene. It depends on when you talk to me. Sula is, of course, a lifelong favorite. And every time I read it, I see something else in it that I love. A Mercy, one of her later novels, just continues to blow me away. And I find myself returning to that. Song of Solomon, beloved. There are passages in Paradise that I feel like I read it and I missed it. And then I go back. And lately I've been returning to Love, which is probably one of her least read novels. So, I think at any given moment, at any day, there will be a different favorite.
I understand perfectly. Yeah. And I think, for me growing up, Sula, of course, touched me as a young Black woman growing up. There's so much of that I could relate to. And then Mercy, I just loved it because it's history. It's, it's that story that's not been told. Paradise was a little bit more complicated, but as you said, it's so layered. You have to.
I remember when it first came out, I had been visiting the poet Harriet Mullen in California. And when it first came out, I got up, or I don't know if I'd been visiting her or we'd been talking, and I took a flight from California. And when the plane landed, because it came out in the 90s, you remember, and some of your listeners won't identify with this, we didn't have cell phones. And so I got off the plane and I called her on the payphone. I called Harriet.
What is a payphone? I know.
I have one of those calling cards that you use. And I called her and I said, because we couldn't call from the plane. And I said, Harriet, I just finished this book. I have no idea what happened. I am so confused, And so it was like a need to reread it and talk about it again and again.
You do. And I think that's what's also important. You stress how your reading became deeper by continuing to go back and looking at it in different ways, and then seeing how it related to people who were around you. Your father, um, you're not the oldest, I'm the oldest daughter, you know, special relationship with the father, although my father was not there from the time I was 9 years old, but I'll never forget because, you know, the intellectual journey is one that he emphasized. And I really related to that when you began talking about that journey with your father. So
Yeah, I think that we wouldn't it one of the things that I think, because I've talked to so many people about this, is it would be fantastic to do something on Black women intellectuals and artists and our fathers. Even the fathers who weren't there or who weren't there after a certain point, but so many people, the fathers are a touchstone for the sort of path, the intellectual and artistic path that we took.
why do you think that is so in our community?
You know, I don't know. I mean, that would be, I'm going to have, like, you can do a conference on that question, but I know it comes up a lot. I know that my friend, the late Jerry Allen, a brilliant jazz musician and composer, talks about her father introducing her to jazz and that being the music that would become her life's work. And I just think it's really fascinating. I don't know. Maybe it's because the fathers are relieved of the burden of having to like feed, clothe, you know, do
Yes,
daily work of keeping us alive.
that's right.
And then they can tend to maybe some of those other things.
During that intellectual imagination. And then you gave us other readings like on Frederick Douglass. So this is something you teach. We don't normally think of Frederick Douglass as a real activist and really political, but the way you presented him and has his message about white supremacy just gave another dimension.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I hope I encourage is I encourage people to think in a kind of interdisciplinary way, because those of us who teach literature think of Douglass primarily as the writer of these amazing autobiographies, but the historians know him for his activism and know him as, you know, the great abolitionist and the great activist, and who eventually criticized Lincoln and then became an ally of Lincoln. And so I try to bring both of those together so that we see Douglass, the activist, who is also the writer, and that those two things are feeding each other in this. And then I talk about him in the context of Malcolm as writer and activist, and then Barack Obama as writer, because we forget that the former president is an extraordinary writer.
Yes.
He really
I don't
is.
know if you've ever seen, he talked about how he composes his speech. That process is very, very detailed, a lot of revision. He understands that very naturally. So
Yes.
you also, you know, we got another perspective on the intersection with Wright and his grandmother and Obama, just helping us to look at that in a different way. And
Yeah.
also, yes, I'm sorry.
I think you're right. I think that you know, that's what literature provides. It gives you the opportunity to say, okay, what went into making this piece of writing? Like, you know, it's so multidimensional.
I also was drawn to the way you talked about grief. You know that we have learned to live with grief. That's something that I'm looking for the quote. Um, I had coach that our culture makes room for the dead. You know, we come from a culture that makes room for the dead. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, you know, I talk a lot about the kind of premature deaths of my own family, and realize that that is something that Black people experience, and that death, you know, come up with our own mourning rituals, our own way of understanding our relationship to the dead, and our sense that in many instances the dead are not gone, they're just in a different form around us. Um, and so we make room for death because we have to make sense of it. Death in and of itself is absurd to us, and the ways that Black people die are unfortunate and unfair. And we would lose our minds if we didn't come up. All people come up with a way of understanding death. All great peoples do. We are a great people, and we have come up with our own ways of understanding and of mourning our dead, but also keeping them with us. And that's something that I experience personally. And I talk to friends and colleagues who experience it. And then once again, our art demonstrates it as well.
And just related to that is how we deal with, I would say, justice, but injustice, and you're very open about what has happened in your family. I mean, again, that's something that so many of us, I think, could relate to, because we all have people in our family who've been either victims or been subjected or part of the criminal justice system. But guess what do we do? What do we do with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I wanted to say that for many of us, these are not abstractions.
Yes.
Not theoretical, that, we can theorize them, but that we experience them for real. And I wanted to show how in the community that I grew up in, that the stigma of people who were incarcerated really, we embraced the people who were incarcerated because we understood that many of them would have encounters with the criminal justice system that were unjust, and that they might experience their own trauma and victimization once they were incarcerated. So we welcomed them back into the fold tenderly, and that we almost expected the so-called justice system, not to work in our favor, that we continue to work to make it address our concerns and make it fair and actually make it just. But we have that expectation that it is not, and that it's rare that we can point to instances where justice has been served.
I think you make that reality you described, a scene from Lesson Before Dying, and of course Native Son, and the people who end up becoming the other whites, showing their humanity in addressing and relating to someone who's been unjust. Because so there's a lesson in those passages for race relations.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, those writers, and I think, in this instance, I have Richard Wright, and I have Ernest Gaines, and also later on Baldwin, where they give us white characters who are redeemed, right? And one of the things they have to do in order to be redeemed, to experience redemption, is acknowledge the humanity of the Black people, recognize the injustice of the system that they benefit from, right? And they have to give up some of that privilege in each instance, to stand alongside the Black characters and bear witness to them. And so it's as if each of these writers is saying, here's an example of how you might get it right.
Yes. That whole idea of bearing witness and the struggle that we go through. And then one way, surviving, bringing the music and the gardening. Music is, music embodies part of your life's value and your life's work. You want to talk about how music impacted you personally, as well as in your work.
So, I had in some way midpoint in the book, because I also wanted to talk about our joy, and
Yes.
our sense of community and grace. And at some point in the book, I had to be honest, because I'm writing about, how much I read as a kid, how my house was full of books. My dad was a reader. But at some point I had to say, you know what? Books were important to me and they were important to some folk. But what was really important to us as a people was our music.
Yes.
That's what was really important. And that music, I think it wasn't until I got older that I realized to really write about Black life, I had to write about music. I took it for granted. We tend to take it for granted because it's so ubiquitous. It's all around us.
That's
You
right.
know, it informs everything about us. We love our artists. They love us. And so I couldn't write a book about Black life or any moment in our history without writing about the music of that time and how it shaped us. I think it shapes everything from how we think, to how we talk, to how we walk, and to how we engage with the broader culture.
Yes, I thought about listening again. My father, jazz, and the intellectual thoughts. It all came, the intellectual spirit in ARM that I'd always think about.
Yeah.
So I really, really related to that. So you are teaching in a predominantly white institution, and you're teaching, you're dealing with Black literature and, continuously. And you talk a little bit about how you introduce your students. But what has been your students' responses to the literature and the way you teach? And what can you say for those who really don't understand what we're doing in the classroom, who want to ban the books, who want to ban Toni Morrison?
Oh, can you believe 2022 we're in this place? It's interesting. I get the best of both worlds because I get a lot of Black students. Like you said, I teach in a predominantly white institution, an elite white institution. But the Black students who are in that institution find their way to me.
That's right. That's right.
So I have some classes where the majority of my students are Black. I had one class where every student was a Black woman, except for one young, brave Black young man who was in the class. But I also get many Asian students, many Latino students, and many, many white students. And I have to say that they love the literature. They absolutely love it. And they are open to it. And they come to the class because they want to know. And they are good readers. And they want to learn. And they want to engage. And I try to create a space where they feel safe. And I say, you know what? There's no question you can't ask. You can ask any question. Everybody in this classroom, there is no dumb question. You just have to respect each other. And we are going to do this together. We're going to create a community together. So it's one of my favorite things is that I get such a diverse body of students who have a profound appreciation for the literature that they're being introduced to.
So how can you take that knowledge and the strategies you have and apply it to what's going on outside of the academy?
Well, this is what I always say. The people who want to ban Toni Morrison, they don't read Toni Morrison because it's not about that, right? It's about maintaining a certain kind of control, about not wanting to deal with difference, not wanting their children to be exposed to difference. But readers, people who are readers, I don't care what their race or their nation, do not ban books. Readers don't ban books. So the people who are insisting on banning the books, they aren't readers and they don't read. Because if they did, first of all, they would find that there's not a lot of danger, that there's just a chance to grow and even to grow in your disagreement. If you want to disagree with us, read some more about us. Yes. And then you'll have a basis upon which to disagree.
That's right.
So those are fights from people who are they're based out of a desire for power and a desire for control, and they have nothing at all to do with learning and understanding, and they shouldn't be making decisions about what anyone gets to read.
So in reading, read until you understand. It's a call. It's a call for all of us to read more deeply, to really question and to use it as a framework for talking about those larger issues.
Absolutely.
Now you are always working. Do you want to share what is your next project?
Well, I'm trying to give my brain a break, but I am writing a small book on, some things about Toni Morrison's work. It's going to be part of a series of books about Black thinkers. And I'm really excited. I have a collection of essays that will be coming out. And those are some essays that have been previously published and a few new ones. So kind of new and selected essays. And I think that'll be really fun to have them all in one place.
I love it. That'll be fun. Well, I really want to thank you. I thank you for the work you do and thank you for your passion. And I want to encourage our listening audience and our viewers to purchase Read to You Until You Understand the Profound Wisdom of Black Life and Black Literature by Farah Jasmine Griffin. And I would say, as I said to my book club members, if don't get upset if you don't read it all the way through. This is the kind of book that you can read, sit down, go back to. You can always pick it up because you're continually rereading.
You're always rereading and you feel you can start at any chapter that you want to start. Before we go, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for all that you've done for Black writers, for Black literature, for this tradition, for the institution that you've built. and the students and writers who you've nurtured. So thank you so much for everything you've done.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. Okay, so I want to remind you that the writer is always reading and reading till they understand, and the reader is always writing, as we see in Dr. Farah Jasmine Griffin. Write me at writers@mec.cuny.edu. And this radio show is paid for by Medgar Evers College. Thank you once again. And we're looking forward to seeing you at our future programs. And you definitely embody the beautiful struggle, Black writers lighting the way.
Thank
you. Thank you again.
Bye-bye.